Well, hi everybody. We're on the road today, podcasting from the Greater Toronto Area, boardroom, busy. But we had to take time. I had to call in. I had to call the guy from the bullpen. I had to call in the heater from the bullpen for today's show because there's so much going on. Please welcome the gold standard in broadcasting and someone I'm very fortunate to call a friend to podcast.
I don't wish to be called the gold standard today because gold has been taking a hit on the market. So
Yeah. Silver, platinum. What do you want?
That's right. Friend of Dean is
My friend.
is the honor. Yeah.
My friend Charles Adler. It's funny because there's a time where I'm like, that guy would probably never be my friend because I am too toxic. Unlikely friendship.
We all have our own crosses to bear and our rehab work to do, and we've all done a not bad job. We can always do better.
Isn't that the case, right? Where you go through life thinking you're something for a certain period of time, and then you get found out, and then you're like, oh, I guess I got to be a better person. Hopefully no one finds those things out. Where it's funny because the knock on me is always the same. Aren't you that guy? And I'm like, kind of I used to be. And then you talk to people about your history in radio, and you're like, wasn't he that guy? And I was like, well, I used to be. But yeah, everybody evolves, right? Everybody gets better. But they want a different life.
But the crazy thing about life is you always get judged by your worst moments, which is, ridiculous. But let's face it, our report card every single day of our lives is needs improvement. Yeah. Deanie, Chucky, they need improvement.
I'm so thankful I still have time. There are a lot of people that didn't get the net, that didn't say, hey, I've arrived. I figured it all out. And it's funny because those are the people we seem to follow. Right, or the people that look like they've got it together. But if you canvassed anybody like you or me, specifically from our industry, and you're like, which radio guys, which media guys are the most like mentally, emotionally together guys you've ever met? I'd be like, yeah, I'll let you know when I find that person.
Yeah. But, I tell you, all of these things that happen to us and happen to other people, the lesson that we learn from all of them is that we're human. Yeah. And the most important, I think, aspect of what happens, especially if we're involved in public communications, is it allows us to make fun of ourselves. Mm-hmm. It allows us to be self-deprecating. And to me, any communicator that takes themselves too seriously, that doesn't allow anyone to make fun of themselves and who doesn't make fun of themselves, is not the communicator that you want to be, or yours truly for that matter.
No, and a great pivot. You must have done this job before too. What we're talking about, which is being progressive, which is trying to understand the world around you. And this week, unlike any other, I mean, we've dealt with some things that require some nuance, some context, but require some history, that require some understanding, that require some context from other people. And I am not that other person, which is why you're here. Obviously, we're talking about the fact that in the House of Commons, we gave a standing ovation to a former Nazi SS soldier named Yaroslav Hunka. And it is not just front page news. It is a battering ram for some. It's an opportunity to gaslight for others, but it is an unmitigated disaster. It's an unmitigated disaster. And I wanted your thoughts on it from two different angles. You and I chatted about it today, but, from a journalistic perspective, from a right and wrong perspective, a historical perspective. So there's the educational portion, but, you being the son of two Jewish people who left Hungary during the Holocaust and the history that you have, in as much as, you can relate this back as a Jewish human being, because, I'm seeing a lot of people that don't understand the history, weigh in on the definitive meaning of what's going on and liking to paint people. And I just wanted to go right to the source. So that's why I wanted to have you on today.
So let me just begin with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, as we speak, as we're live with a lot of people who are paying attention, but we're also most people who will be listening to this will be listening to a recorded version of the podcast. But as we speak, at a little after 2:00 Eastern time, the Prime Minister of Canada is apologizing for the black eye that was given to Canada in the last few days. As a person of Jewish heritage, and I don't pretend to be religious, but I'm also not unconscious. It's impossible, if your heritage is Jewish, not to be aware that the holiest of holy days was this past Monday, event is called Yom Kippur. It's ushered in on Sunday night. It implores Jews around the world to reflect deeply on their behavior of the past year and to seek atonement, redemption, as it were, for their sins. That's what it's about. Whether you're secular or religious, it's hard not to take Yom Kippur seriously. It is very difficult as a Jew to not take seriously that in this period, a person who was involved in Hitler's so-called final solution, meaning the extermination of as many Jews as possible, this person was in the gallery being honored. Now, most people, I would say all people who were applauding, had no idea who this guy was. Supposedly, he was a war veteran, and the Speaker of the House, who was responsible for the invitation, didn't do basic checks, even though the Speaker of the House found out that he was a war veteran who opposed Russia. That's what he was nominally about in the paperwork that the Speaker saw. Didn't understand that a Ukrainian, because of that part of the world and because of the war that was going on, a Ukrainian opposing Russia means a Ukrainian supporting Germany. So that should have given him a clue. Anyway, the Speaker of the House and the people involved in the Speaker's office were without a clue about World War II, what it was about. You would think that because Zelensky was going to be honored, you would think that because of how Putin has been doing propaganda for the last number of years, but especially in the last couple of years, about how his forces are supposed to be about liberating Ukraine from Nazism, you would think that any Canadian authority would be extra sensitive to which old Ukrainians are involved in the gallery. And I need to say that we've got tens of thousands of Ukrainians, some 40,000 Ukrainian Canadians who participated in fighting in a Canadian uniform, fighting Nazism. The overwhelming majority of Ukrainians in Ukraine were fighting with the Soviet Union, which they were part of, and the Soviet Union in World War II was our ally. So, excuse me.
Bless you.
That, I think, gives us a bit of a jump start into what this is about, not just for Jews and for others. And I also always want to make sure that, because I'm a child of survivors, that I make sure everyone understands that I am highly aware that the Holocaust, while the central target was Jews, gypsies, disabled people, physically and mentally disabled people, LGBT, and others were also exterminated. So when the Holocaust is talked about generally, it's discussed as an event targeting Jews. It needs to be said that many others were targeted as well. Many other civilians were targeted. Many of those happen to be Polish, and that's one of the reasons why a member of the Polish government now wants to extradite this individual who was in that gallery in Ottawa, wants to bring him to Poland and put him on trial for war crimes against the Polish people.
Yeah, there's some backstory and also front story, meaning the fallout from this. And I'm just going to kind of refresh people's memories. And I apologize. I hope this doesn't trigger anybody. This is a CBC reporter commenting on the fact that this is prior to us, really having the firsthand knowledge of what this gentleman did as a member of the Nazi SS. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. Here's the actual clip, and I want to get your thoughts on a couple things after I play it.
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War.
Now, that is part of the narrative. And obviously part of the narrative that Anthony Rota, the former Speaker of the House, who has since resigned under a cloud of just pure embarrassment for not doing his homework, not figuring out that, sure, yeah, he fought the Russians back then, but as you point out, if you go through that timeline, 1941 to 1945, the people that fought the Russians were fascists. They were Nazis. We know that. They were German. This gentleman's story, you can times it by 2000, from what I understand, is back in 1945. Certain members of the Waffen SS came to Canada, and Canada willingly took these people in. This gentleman has been here for what, 70 years? Is that what I
Yeah.
understand? 60,
Yeah,
70 years?
this man has had a good Canadian life is what he had access to, and that's brutally unjust, but that's the case, and along with thousands of others, because there were Ukrainians, in this case, Eastern Europeans, all
Yeah.
kinds of Eastern Europeans who wanted members of their family and others um, who fought in World War II, regardless of which side they fought for, to come to Canada. And Canada, at times, has been brutally unjust about bringing certain people in who really, really needed to be here. I'm talking specifically about refugees, including those people who are trying to avoid becoming concentration camp victims. There's a book about that called None is Too Many. And one of the authors is Abella, the former Supreme Court, Canadian Supreme Court Justice, Rosalie Abella, and written with Irving Abella as well. None is Too Many is the name of the book, because that was the policy of the Mackenzie King government in World War II. The ship specifically discussed in that particular narrative was turned back by the Canadian Navy, and the ship went back to Europe, and everyone on that ship who was Jewish was sent to a concentration camp, and there were no survivors. So that is a very, very black eye for Canada. But after World War II, Canada, I'd have to say, was overly generous by bringing in people, and I'm glad we brought in a lot of people who were war vets who fought on our side. The fact is, we also brought many in who fought against us.
Is there any nuance in your mind or any context in your mind where that was a good idea at this point?
No, I mean, there have been people who rationalized all of this by saying that those people who were accomplices of Hitler, regardless of which country they were helping him out in, had no choice. That's not true. When it came to elite forces like the Waffen SS, the only way you could join those forces was to not just volunteer, but to be enthusiastic about the war crimes that had to be committed.
What was that
if you were,
litmus test? Like what, like there was a series of questions that because as you point out, you need willing accomplices to commit the
Sure.
atrocities that this gentleman has admitted to, and we have documented proof that he has also committed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the litmus tests were simple. They involved themselves in operations, and any soldier, any special forces soldier, which is what they were, any special forces soldier knows whether or not his comrade is with him or against him.
Yeah.
And when you're doing some of the sickest things to men, women, and children, I'm talking about torturing and shooting civilians. It's very, very easy to find out whether or not the person who is a part of your unit is enthusiastic or not. So one of the sort of great myths over the years has been that those people who helped Hitler had no choice. That is not true. The people who helped him the most, especially in carrying out the so-called final solution, were not just accomplices; they were enthusiastic and willing accomplices. And ethically, there's a huge line of separation between that and people who are conscripted, forced to be inside a regular military unit, whether it's German or any other.
And it's interesting because I would say over the past like 6 to 8 months, I'm trying to figure this out. Because Ukraine has an incredibly complex history when it comes to Nazism. I mean, it just does.
Yeah.
You can go back, and I made mention of this, and the reason why I wanted to have you on is because I don't know, and it's disingenuous for me to say, well, some people had a choice and some people didn't, right? And I don't know the history as well as you know the history, in as much as I have been able to research, the Galicia Waffen SS, this Yaroslav Hunka individual. Watched an incredible special on the Einsatzgruppen, recently on Netflix, which gave some historical context. But, it almost seems like when it comes to this subject, and specifically when it comes to this gentleman and the pure embarrassment of us not doing our homework, it almost seems like none of that context matters anymore. To some people it does. I spoke with a gentleman today. I was at a meeting this afternoon, gentleman's of Jewish descent. And he and he worked with another gentleman who was a baker who came from Germany, who he gave him a chance to talk to him about, his historical background in terms of, Nazism. And it was amazing because there are different schools of thought from everybody, but I think the only people that matter are the people who are survivors, children of survivors, descendants of survivors when it comes to weighing in on this conversation. But does all that context about, how it was possible for a Ukrainian back in the day to join the Nazis in exterminating their own people, does any of that context matter anymore, or is there no nuance that matters? And are we does the idea that he may have been willing or unwilling, in this case very willing because of the Waffen SS, as you pointed out, was one of the elite groups in killing machines that rampaged through Europe. But is there any context that matters, or like how do you educate people as to the fact that maybe the context doesn't matter, maybe it doesn't at all?
All I know is that many people, when they learn about history, tend to nod off because they have this habit of not caring about anything that happened before
Sure.
breakfast. So
Yeah.
what matters to me is this, and this is something that I live with, and in terms of my own thinking, deal with every day. Many Jews died at Auschwitz. Many Jews died elsewhere. Many Jews were gunned down in ditches and were destroyed in a number of ways. My own grandparents were gassed. Many of my other relatives were also gassed, and some were murdered in other ways. I actually do not know how many dozens of members. I don't know a specific number, but we're talking about dozens of members of my extended family were murdered in the Holocaust. Thankfully, my parents were able to escape the Holocaust, as you mentioned off the top of the show. But what matters most to me is that while many Jews were killed, 6 million were killed in the Holocaust, Nazism survived. Nazism continued to thrive, and it continues to thrive today. And it doesn't matter to me whether it's called Nazism, fascism, far right-wing extremism. I really don't give a damn about the label. The idea that many people in our own country, Canada, are willing to, on any given day, demonize their political opponents and villainize their political opponents and make all sorts of accusations. Post media running a story this week based on what they claim is some Indian or former East Indian diplomat saying that Justin Trudeau during the G20 summit was on cocaine. I mean, I don't understand why post media has to resemble Russian media in putting out this kind of propaganda with absolutely no evidence, no evidence to corroborate that particular charge. But that is the kind of extremism that I'm talking about, and you don't have to call it Nazism. It's not technically Nazism, but it is not Canadian. It's not in line with Canadian values. Most important, Dean, if we're talking about history, it's not in line with the values that our fighting men fought for in World War II. That kind of big lie extremism is what our people fought against. And I would only hope that going forward, we have a country where most people understand what it is that we fight for, what it is that we fight against. Who are we as Canadians? What is Canada? Canada is not just an amalgamation of shopping centers. It's not just real estate. Canada is a real country. In my opinion, it's the most beautiful country on earth. It's the country that gave my two parents and me an opportunity to live in freedom. We are refugees from authoritarianism, specifically refugees from communism. I can never thank Canada enough, and I know I've said it here on this podcast and elsewhere that my entire career has been a thank you card to Canada.
You mentioned that you see Nazism in Canada in today's institutions, North America. We see it as a populist movement to some extent. Is it Nazism that you see in these institutions and political parties and the gaslighting and the rhetoric and the propaganda from the National Post, or is it authoritarianism?
I think of it as authoritarianism. I discuss it as authoritarianism because if I think of it or talk about it in terms of Nazism, I miss the point, and then the conversation becomes, why did you call it that? And
it's one of those words, right? They lost all the meaning. Yeah.
Anybody involved in public communications knows there are several ways to step on your own message. And one of the ways to step on your message is to call something, use the word Hitler or Nazism. And then that's what the discussion is about. And then people miss the point. And I always blame, yes, I do blame. I blame the person who's using the words. We must use our language. We must use our English language in an intelligent way. We must be very selective about the words we use, because words mean things. And if words mean things that we don't mean, we are guilty of misrepresenting what it is that we're trying to say. When we're talking about tender topics, sensitive topics, we've got to be very careful about what labels we use. Some people choose to be so careful as to not even put labels on what they talk about. I think sometimes labels are necessary to get people's attention. But if I use a label like Nazism to describe what someone like Pierre Poilievre is doing, then, I totally missed the mark. And I have to reflect and ask myself, what was the point of me opening my mouth today? I mean, I only have a certain amount of hours in a day. I only have a certain amount of days in my life. How much of my life do I want to waste stepping on my own message? I'd love to think I could spend my entire life with never stepping on my message. That would be perfection. I am not perfect, but I think I am wise enough not to call Pierre Poilievre a Nazi. And when I see certain friends of mine or associates, acquaintances, Twitter friends calling him that, I have deep regrets, because that completely misses the point. But beyond all of that, it diminishes the lives of those people who suffered a great deal at the hands of Nazism. You don't, if you believe in never again, you need to believe that calling people Nazis when they're not Nazis is not a way of having that. It is the opposite. If you call someone a Nazi when they clearly aren't, their supporters, their friends, their relatives, their followers will turn on you. Mm-hmm. And the easiest way to help an authoritarian is to mislabel him.
Well said. But there was a real Nazi in the House of Commons. Like a real Nazi member.
That's different, because he served willingly, and there's a website where some of his words are on the site, and he has been interviewed, and he's proud of his service, and said that he enjoyed being a Nazi. So I mean, I guess in some ways I've got to give the devil his due and say at least he's one of the honest ones. But yeah, in that case, it's not misappropriating the name. That's the cause he was in service of. Yes.
But since that point, I mean, generally he is a Nazi SS guy, Yaroslav Hunka. We give him a standing applause. And Justin Trudeau has since profusely apologized national television not long ago. You were just making mention of it. That's part of the fallout. But the way forward, we're seeing this weaponized, right? We're seeing the diminishing return of that word, which, like a bunch of words that we've watched people absolutely overuse for specific, kettling purposes. It's lost its importance, right? And so when I watched Pierre Poilievre, Melissa Lantsman, the conservative machinery, the ideology of those people that parroted the same talking points coming out of Russia, and it happened again today, parrot the same talking points, painting Canada as a country that enabled a Nazi to go and have a standing ovation in the House of Commons when it was really pure incompetence, if I'm to believe Anthony Rota, and who just resigned, if I'm to believe you, that this was just this incompetent stroke of stupidity on behalf.
Well, I mean, but you have to ask yourself, why would it be? I mean, I would ask Melissa Lantsman, I would ask Pierre Poilievre, why would it be in Justin Trudeau's interest? Where is his political interest in enabling Nazism, enabling Nazi ideology, especially if we're supporting Ukraine?
Well, clearly there is none, which makes what they're doing now, and I want your thoughts on it. Like, the weaponization of this as a process, right? Like, I know we have to get out from underneath this. We have to explain it. We have to fall prostrate on the idea that we fucked up, which we did, pardon my language, but we screwed up. We look incompetent. But the torquing of this which the Conservative Party is doing, and Pierre Poilievre is doing, and the Melissa Lantsmans are doing, which blows my mind according to her heritage, is that the torquing of this as another opportunity for a Canadian politician who wants to be the prime minister of this country to side with disinformation and foreign policy, foreign propaganda. I find it odd that no one's talking about that. Like, I find it weird that we've got a political party that parrots the same propaganda, whether it be Trudeau missing a G20 dinner because he was all coked up. That's coming out of India. We laughed about that, which is ridiculous. He wants to know more from India. And same thing with this. It was a mistake. Canada's a great place. Nazis have no place in Canada, which should have been a resounding message from all the parties, bipartisan, across the board. It is, we are that prime minister of ours. He does need to go. He applauds Nazis, and that's what they do. And to your point, it's not like that was the end result. It's not like that was the specified goal.
No. Look, the conservatives, too many conservatives, in many cases, provincial conservatives, federal conservatives, do not have confidence in conservatism. Don't have confidence in their own message. I mean, the central conservative message is we're better for the economy than the other guys. And that matters, because if we're better for the economy, we're better for economic opportunity, we're better for the chances of having a middle-class life and maintaining your middle-class life. We're better for Canadians. If they had more confidence on espousing that message, they wouldn't go to all this other stuff. But when I see them going to the Trudeau's, doing cocaine, and Trudeau's a Nazi or an enabler of Nazis, I mean, that just tells me that conservatives don't have what it takes to spread a winning, confident, positive Canadian conservative message. And that's what we're seeing here. If it wasn't, for politics, it wasn't for an election that's coming up eventually, probably 2 years from now, I don't think they'd be doing this. But they put everything through the filter of how can we damage Trudeau today? How can we kick him again? And that's what this is. I mean, it's gross, it's nonsense, it's extreme, it's not Canadian, but they feel it works for them, and they're always reinforced by the fact that they're getting clicks, so they're getting action on Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms, and they're getting money. They look at the amount of money that's coming in every day, and every time they push some kind of extreme thing, and they label Trudeau with some kind of extreme thing, the people who love hearing that stuff send them money.
How do you feel about that? How do you feel about them diminishing that word, weaponizing that word, putting out a tweet with some micro content and a small video calling Canada what they've called Canada under Trudeau because of this egregiously embarrassing mistake, with a little link to donate to the Conservative Party of Canada underneath it?
I mean, it's embarrassing to me primarily because that was my home. Canadian conservatism was my home for so many years. So I'm embarrassed by it. But if you're asking me what I think about it globally, I pay far more attention to what Russia is doing to Ukraine. I pay far more attention to whether or not Ukraine is getting the supplies it needs from Canada and from the United States and NATO countries. That's where the fight for democracy is the most arduous, the most painful, and will have the most consequences, because whether people like to hear it or not, if Russia prevails in Ukraine, other countries will be next. Other countries could fall like dominoes. One of those countries happens to be Poland, which is, as I said a few moments ago, where one of the members of the Polish administration is quite serious about wanting to extradite the person who was in the gallery, the old Nazi himself. Ukraine is, to me, the president of Ukraine is a champion for democracy. He's someone who deserves all the accolades he gets, whether he gets them from Canada, the United States, or elsewhere. The idea of Canada doing anything, and the idea of the Conservative Party of Canada doing anything to feed Putin, to feed his, to put feed into his feed bag, because his central message, Putin's central message, is he wants to liberate Ukraine from Nazis. So the idea that Canadian conservatives would enable that, or anything that happens in this country could enable that narrative, that's something that disturbs me a great deal. I want every day to be a difficult day for Vladimir Putin. I don't want to give him any easy days.
Yeah, and going back to what we talked about at the start, obviously you're not going to hear from a politician in North America. Maybe you might in the States, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's crazy. Or the Lauren Boeberts, it's crazy. But under the guise of no more war in Ukraine, you warmongers, we see that coming from the right and the extreme left, right? It's not just a specific conservative thing, but the desire to support Russia comes in many different forms. But if there is that support for any message, a continuing message of they need to get the duly elected government in Canada out, right? And that message is shared by and supported by political parties here in Canada, that gives me pause for thought as to whether or not the authoritarian government, which supports the same messaging of a political party here in Canada, wants the same thing, which is another authoritarian government here in this country. Because that's what I see in the rhetoric. That's what I hear when I look at guys like Poilievre and the Lancemans of the world. It's, we're formless. We'll take advantage of any atmosphere and opportunity, including that created by Russia and their messaging. And we actually want the same things they do. We just never come out and say it. And, it's not even so much as to what they say, Chuck. But if you look at Pierre Poilievre's timeline, his Twitter timeline during the Zelensky visit, not one message, not one word, not one tweet about his speech and the support of the people of Ukraine. It is a fire hose of disinformation and propaganda, calling his own country a fascist Nazi celebrating country.
This is how Poilievre was applauding.
Yeah.
This is the tepid applause. But people are listening to this, so they don't, see what I'm doing here. For some people who watch this on YouTube, the point is,
it's a weak golf clap. You can't see it. It's a weak golf clap.
Yeah. That's what Poilievre was doing. In doing that, he was disrespecting, dishonoring democracy, and specifically dishonoring Zelensky. When you're offering a clap that contains no enthusiasm at all, you're just dog whistling to your followers that you don't really support Zelensky, and you don't really support democracy. You don't really support any of the things that most Canadians support. Wink, wink, nod, nod, dog whistle. It's disgusting. And if a 10-year-old is doing it, or an 18-year-old, a high schooler is doing that, that's one thing. But this is a man who aspires to becoming Prime Minister of Canada. He couldn't even bother. The big story, of course, is who was invited to the gallery. But another story that isn't going to get much play is how dare the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, how dare the leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition be sarcastic, be tepid, be weak, be cowardly, be enabling of Putin by offering that kind of soft applause for a man like Zelensky. How dare he?
Body language is easy to ascertain, right? For anybody that's watched someone, as you pointed out, give that tepid applause in that video that's going around, it's not just the tepid applause on Pierre Poilievre's face and subsequent 3 days of gaslighting an entire nation of people that he wants to trust him with their vote, right? It's not just that, but it was the expression on his face. Pardon the expression, the shit-eating grin, like, I am just here wasting time. And I don't know who that tepid applause was for, but there are certain governments around this country that are tied in very tightly to the former prime minister of this country named Stephen Harper. And those governments are in the news right now and have real problems, real beef with Canada. One is India. Of course, the assassination of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil by the Indian government, which was outed by Five Eyes, specifically Jake Sullivan. The United States, he gave us that information. We acted on that information. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives then side with or want proof of this and not being willing to take Justin Trudeau's word for it, therefore painting him as someone who's mistrustworthy or not trustworthy specifically, but it just makes us all look like idiots, number one.
Well, I mean, Poilievre could find out what the specific information is if only he would take a security test, but he thinks that having a security clearance robs him of freedom of speech, robs him of saying things that, to be polite about it, under the category of disinformation. He wants to be as much of a disinformation agent as possible, and the easiest way for him to do that is to literally be unaware of secrets that he, as opposition leader, would have access to if only he got a security clearance. I mean, what is that? A person, once again, aspiring to be prime minister who doesn't want to have a security clearance, doesn't want to have access to the nation's top secrets. I mean, what the hell is that?
Is he unwilling to submit to the test?
Yeah. He doesn't want to.
So what are the reasons a guy?
Well, his reason, he thinks that if he takes the test, he'll be muzzled.
Well, that's his reason. That's the reason he gives us, Chuck.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if he's got. I mean, I don't know if he's got
skeletons,
something going on. I mean, I don't know that. I'm not a conspiracist. I'm not going to say something where I have no evidence. I'm not going to make an accusation without evidence.
Oh, you mean you're going to be a stand-up person and just deliver information that you're aware of?
I mean, how I can't be landing on other people for being disinformation agents and then be an agent of disinformation myself. I'm not going to do that. All I know is that, Jagmeet Singh has a security clearance, and over the years, many people who have been leaders of conservative parties and liberal parties, who didn't matter who was in opposition. I mean, this is something that you do because you're a public servant, or at least you're supposed to be. Sure. And so the fact is that we live in this wonderful country called Canada, where political opponents are not enemies, are not treated like political enemies. Political opponents are given access to top secrets. The idea that someone is given that kind of immense Canadian privilege and doesn't take advantage of it, to me, there's something wrong there.
Well, then if we're not going to invent reasons or skeletons or pull fake skeletons out of closets to ascertain why he can't get security clearance, which, by the way, you're better than that. I might not be, but if that's the case, then you can only assume that the reason he doesn't have security clearance is because he prefers to. Instead of protecting Canadians, which if he became the prime minister would have to take an oath, right, to protect Canadians and the solidarity of Canada and the sovereignty of Canada. Yeah. He's not interested in those things. Well, that's the only conclusion I could draw from that.
I do want to, give him sort of credit for this. I mean, this is an assumption on my part, but I do think that if he did become prime minister, he would get himself a security clearance. I don't know how you can operate as prime minister without a security clearance. How do you operate as a prime minister and invite members of CSIS and the RCMP to have sensitive discussions with you when they're not allowed to tell you what they need to tell you because you haven't gotten a security clearance? So I can't, at some point, if he does become prime minister, I do believe he'll get himself cleared. Otherwise, he's, completely irrational. I'd have to use the C word. At that point, I'd have to declare him crazy.
Oh, that's not the C word that I prefer. But anyway, I get it. Yeah, there's a couple other ones that I'm a big fan of. But can you be the prime minister without having a security clearance? Like, it seems to me,
I don't know if there's a law
position without it. Like,
I don't know if there's a law about that. So much in a democracy is simply goodwill. Something called honor, which a lot of people have trouble defining these days. But to put it mildly, it's dishonorable for a prime minister to dishonor our intelligence service. Remember that many of the secrets we have because our people were willing to sacrifice their lives to be in a position to get secrets. So it's dishonoring a number of Canadians to not get a security clearance. In my opinion, he's dishonoring many of those Canadians right now by not getting one. But certainly, if he were prime minister, no, I don't think there's a law, but I just cannot imagine any Canadian prime minister not having a security clearance.
How would you feel, too, to your point, and it's a great point you make, Charles, how would you feel, too, if you are a family member or you're one of the very few surviving World War II veterans, of which my grandfather passed away a number of years ago. He served for the British Army in Africa, in Greece, in Holland, in France. Was one of the first people in Hitler's bunker with his brother who took all the pictures. He was the guy that took the pictures of Potsdam, everybody after the war ended. So a real tie to that history, obviously. And I think about it in those terms where, a guy like Pierre Poilievre does not want clearance because he wants to continue to gaslight and demean the sacrifice of millions and millions of innocent people, right? And demean the sacrifice of Canadians who fought and died, right? Fought and died. Some didn't die. Most fought and died against the very people he doesn't want security clearance to keep an eye on, against that very same ideology. How would you like, to me, that's just I don't give a shit about anything that happened or any of the freedoms that we have.
I don't know how to have a moral discussion with Pierre Poilievre, because morality doesn't seem to interest him. I mean, he's interested in clicks. So what am I going to say to a click whore? Like, don't you have any decency at all? I mean, what am I to say? I mean, talking to him, to me, would be the equivalent of talking to one of these many trolls on Twitter. Some of them are real, some of them aren't, but they're just trolls. I mean, what really? I mean, if a person doesn't wish to get a security clearance, I've got nothing to say to that person. What am I to say? He's shouting at me loudly. He's shouting about not having respect for our vets, not having respect for our security agencies, not having respect for our security. What am I supposed to say to a guy like that?
I don't know. I mean, as someone who lives in Canada, pays taxes in Canada like yourself, someone who's intensely proud of the Canadian involvement in ending the fascist Nazi movement across the world, as someone who's had families who fought, you, of course, have a direct tie with your parents to the atrocities that occurred, which you would think a politician would want some access to the security information that keeps Canada safe against that. He wouldn't want to feed into that for propaganda reasons or personal political gain. And that's the part that grosses me out the most. Like, it's easy for me to ascertain, and Max Fawcett said it best, National Observer. I know you're a big fan of his as well. And I asked him this kind of the same question. He goes, it's shocking, but you might realize not all of us share those values, right? There are people out there that share fascist authoritarian values, that absolutely espouse those values. And is there any other conclusion to come to in terms of the way conservatives and Poilievre are treating our national security and the security of the people who fought and died against that movement?
Well, I'm reluctant to call him a fascist. I think he's a hyper partisan, and I think hyper partisanship enables fascism, enables authoritarianism for sure. But I will need more specific evidence of what it is that he's supporting before I call him that. It's just it's a loaded word.
Yeah.
And if you're loading it with assumptions, if you're loading it with, with unproven talking points, and I don't think you're in service of history. And I think at that point you're diminishing the lives of those who paid a heavy price. Before I use that rhetorical weapon, fascism, I need to believe that a person has shown me evidence that they do wear those dark gloves, as it were.
Well, I appreciate that, and you always act as I'm that guy that likes to get the cart way before the horse sometimes, because it's easier.
It's your choice. It's your choice as to how you want to do public communications. I mean, as you can tell, I'm always mindful of the people who came before me, and the last thing in the world I would want to do is dishonor them in any way. And so I am my father's son. He's always on my shoulder, and I'm not going to do something to piss off Mike Adler. Mike Adler is my real boss.
Still to this day.
Always will be.
I know. I see it. It's pinned to your profile on Twitter.
Yeah.
And again, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this is because I value your opinion, not just on the political discourse, the gaslighting, not just on how embarrassing it was for Canada to applaud a Nazi SS member. I wanted to find out if there was any context that we needed to be aware of. And I don't think there is, according to you. I don't think there is, according to people I've talked to over the past couple of days. Justin Ling put out a piece today, agree with it or don't disagree with it, where he talked about the nuances involved in conscription, the Holodomor, all the stuff that we sort of briefly covered today, which may have put someone in a situation to fight for the Nazis. That is not the case here. And I've come to realize that over the past little bit, talking to people like yourself, doing some research, is that these were willing participants that fought for the Waffen-SS.
You got to remember that one of the reasons that some people, whether they're in Ukraine or elsewhere, and some of them are in this country, one of the reasons they will support Nazism, they say, is because, especially in the World War II context, because Nazism threatened the destruction of the Soviet Union, threatened the destruction of communism. So there were even people in our own country back then who said things like, well, we don't really respect some of Mr. Hitler's methods, but we understand that we have common objectives. And Canada, the United States, and other countries in the free world wanted communism to come to an end. So they saw the Soviet Union's experiment as extremely pernicious, dangerous to the free world, because Marxism, Leninism, as espoused by the Soviet Union, they never made any secret of the fact that they wanted the entire world to be communist. Much later, you had a fellow named Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev was the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in the 1960s. He was the one involved with John F. Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Khrushchev, at one point, publicly said that we will bury you, meaning our world, our communist world, will bury the capitalist world. So many people have rationalized Nazism as some kind of good because Nazism threatened to destroy communism, and that was the greater good. But one of the things you need to be aware of when it comes to not just authoritarians, but people who enable authoritarianism, is they always use this phrase, and you've got to be very, very guarded when you hear it, and you've got to be very suspicious. And the phrase is, the ends justify the means. All kinds of authoritarians, including Nazis and others, have used that phrase. And the ends do not justify the means. You've got to take a very, very good look at what those means are. And if the means involve the destruction of men and women and children because you want to destroy a certain ideology, no, the ends don't justify the means at all. Focus on the bloody means, and those means are often very bloody. And when you focus on those bloody means, you're much less likely to accept the rationalization. Anyone who tries to rationalize going to authoritarianism, I don't care whether it's labeled left-wing authoritarianism or right-wing, it doesn't matter to me. Anyone who wants to justify the idea of having a dictator stripping you of all of your rights and all of your freedoms in the name of some sort of greater good, anytime you're motivated to join up with that, you've got to take a very, very good look at yourself. And to bring it to the Canadian context, that is not what Canada's about. I'm a Canadian first. I'm a proud Canadian. And as a proud Canadian, I refuse to accept the ends justify the means when the ends are authoritarianism and the means are authoritarian.
Yeah, dude, and you see it. You're qualified to know it. You've lived it. Which is why I love talking to you about this. Love it and I don't love it. Obviously, it's because it's such an intense subject, and you can go wrong real quick. And we've seen that over the past couple of days, depending on how you or we talk about this, right? Which is why you parse your words so carefully.
Well, the thing is that some of these discussions are difficult for a lot of people because their minds have not been trained. So all of these words are just jargon to them. This is not jargon. Words do mean things, and you need to train your mind to use words properly, and also to defend yourself against people who are going to make propaganda, whether they're called American conservatives, Canadian conservatives, and other kinds of extremism, other kinds of extremists. I mean, if we don't know what it is that we're talking about, and we cannot advocate what we're talking about, if we don't understand the principles around the terms that we're using, it's very easy to become overwhelmed by people who are very skilled in the deployment of propaganda. And I've got to give Poilievre credit for this. He understands propaganda. He understands messaging. He understands the big lie, and he understands how to engage in all of that. And some of the people who are fighting him and fighting against him aren't as good at diagnosing it quickly and fighting it effectively. They're not as effective in communicating as he is. So it's easy on the one hand to say, well, he doesn't have the morality we want him to have. So what? You don't need to be moral to be politically successful, especially in a liberal democracy, because a liberal democracy gives a lot of people credit where they don't deserve any. So Poilievre gets a lot of credit, including in this conversation, credit from me in having only, crass political reasons for not getting a security clearance. I'm not willing to go beyond that, meaning I give him credit for being fundamentally, a decent human being, even though I can't prove that to you, but I can't disprove it either. I can't prove that he's a I can't prove that he's some sort of authoritarian, and I can't disprove the fact that he's probably at the core a relatively decent guy. Maybe at the core he's just like those new commercials of his. I don't think that's who he is, but I don't know. And until I do know, I cannot declare him to be an authoritarian. And I
So
think
for
that,
now, he's just an opportunist until you see
no, I
otherwise.
have to call him an opportunist. And the more people want to call him an authoritarianism and authoritarian and brand him with all sorts of names,
Yeah.
the more they help his base. Nothing gets his people more enthusiastic than being attacked by the likes of you and me and others. And so I would just say that we need to be relatively careful about the terms we use. Besides, he gives you enough to attack him without having to do that. Just like I say, politically, I mean, the years that are called the Trudeau years,
Yeah.
there's enough going on. There's enough that's been done. There's enough that's happened to give Poilievre a case to make against Justin Trudeau. He doesn't have to go to all this crazy stuff. And I believe, and once again, maybe I'm giving him too much credit, I believe he only goes to the crazy stuff because it gets him clicks and cash.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's about cash, clicks, and perception, right? Like the second you scratch the top surface, it's like kind of watching the Doug Ford Greenbelt shit.
Yeah.
You know, the second you scratch at the top of the surface, the second you pull back that first cover, you see all the junk, right? Like that's just the way it works. And with a guy like Poilievre, you know, he has the ability because he's the leader of the opposition. People take, I guess, some of the things that he says seriously, but the leaning towards, you know, and the dog whistling and the things that I see and the compromise that he tries to make between propaganda and disinformation, to me, it's all the same thing. It all comes from it, which is the desire to subject the people of Canada to the values of his Conservative Party, which is not the Conservative Party of your father, right? That's authoritarian to me and by nature. You know, and I know that you got two main parties that really vie for the business of our bank cards every 4 years. But to me, you know, if it smells like it and looks like it, and I wouldn't use the term fascist either, then it probably is it in terms of authoritarianism.
It's too authoritarian for our blood. I mean, that's fair to say.
Maybe we're just like really like maybe Canadians are just not used to this and it's okay. I feel gross. Like I feel gross that this is a political party that actually is viable and some of the ideas and the gaslighting actually connects with the people that share the same values. Because again, you pull open that cover, you're like, oh my God, how many people out there are like this? Like, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, look, there are people in this country who are ordinarily intelligent people and ordinarily rational people, and they'll say that, you know, Trudeau is a communist and Trudeau is this and Trudeau is that. And where are they getting this from? They're getting it from the conservative ecosystem, and they're buying it. And what can I tell you? I mean, this operation of Poilievre's is extremely successful, and I can't deny its success. I mean, I can't deny that they're well ahead in the polls, and I can't say that they're only ahead in the polls because people are tired of Trudeau. No, there are a number of people who are very turned on by Poilievre's way of framing a message, by Poilievre's way of demonizing the opponent and convincing people that his opponent is at the root of everything that doesn't make sense. If someone can't stand the idea of having to pay $3,000 for rent, or can't stand the idea of paying, you know, $12 for a box of plums, it's Justin Trudeau's fault because Justin Trudeau doesn't care about Canada, because Justin Trudeau's a communist, a cocaine snorting communist, you know, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter how crazy the cartoon is. A lot of people love these crazy cartoons, and unfortunately, political dialogue has now debased itself in this country to the point where it is mostly crazy cartoons that people are immersed in. I think that's also one of the reasons why a lot of Canadians, frankly, tune it all out. They just they're turned off and they stop paying attention, which always does help authoritarians.
Yeah. Last thing I'll ask you: the only person that can save us, Taylor Swift?
I would say that we cannot worship Taylor Swift enough.
Right.
Taylor Swift has a positive message. Taylor Swift, you know, is very melodious.
Yes.
You know, Taylor Swift treats lyrics with respect.
Yes.
And I've always respected country music, and that's where Taylor Swift originally came from.
Yeah.
So even though she doesn't consider herself a country artist anymore,
Yeah.
this boy, you know, in his own thinking, says things like, "Taylor, you're easy on the eyes."
She's not bad. Yeah, she's not bad. And she's like, I don't know if you saw this. She put out an Instagram link for people to sign up for voter cards. More people signed up from that one link than they
Yeah.
did from any other
Oh
government
yeah,
link or
yeah,
attempt.
yeah. The conservative base in the United States is now calling her ugly and
Yeah.
and connecting her to all sorts of
Yeah.
nonsense. But the fact is, she is highly effective.
Oh, yeah.
She knows what she's doing. And for those people who are somewhat business oriented, and thankfully we still live in a capitalist system, and I don't pretend to be anything but a capitalist. I need for everyone to know that Taylor Swift, her net worth is over $730 million, and it's 730 million US dollars. That's a lot of green.
She'd be the richest prime minister in Canada's history. I say we bring her
She
in.
has more. She has more than some countries, and she has no debt. I mean,
No.
yeah. So she ought to be a finance minister.
Yeah.
It's hard for me not to applaud Taylor Swift, because there's just so many things that she does well. And when I say Taylor Swift, I talk about Taylor Swift's organization. By the way, speaking of organizations, the Trump organization is being run right out of town. I mean, the court decision this week,
I heard that,
has basically put them on financial death row. I mean, the Trump organization will be basically dissolved. They're going to have to sell off Mar-a-Lago. They're going to have to sell off all those other golf courses. And Donald Trump and his sons won't be able to do business in New York. Some people don't think that's a big deal. It's a very big deal.
Well, let's get to that real quick, because I'm at a lunch meeting and I'm talking to these guys, and the dude's like, "Do you hear about Trump?" And I'm like, "Fill me in." It's probably something every day. It's something like, "Did you hear about Trump?" You could do that every day, every minute of every day. And he's like, "No, Letitia James just got a judgment against Trump that basically said you're barred from doing business here. Any businesses, any buildings, any money, anything you own, any golf courses, the Trump Tower, all that stuff, we're going to take it and liquidate all of it. And by the way, you own nothing here anymore. We're absconding everything you thought you owned in this state, and this state is going to reach into other states to take the things you own there." Am I on the right track? Did I hear that?
No, you're totally on the right track. Donald Trump has done enough to give a judge license to take it all away, and the authorities in New York will have no trouble at all. They'll take his stuff away, his Trump Tower, his golf courses. They'll take away his ability to do business in New York. They'll take it away without missing a beat. They're doing it enthusiastically.
That's exciting, isn't it? Schadenfreude, one of my favorite emotions, Chuck.
Well,
when bad things happen to bad people.
One of the reasons so many people respect Trump is because they do think he's a multi-billionaire. We're going to find out very soon how much bathing suit he's got left, because it's just amazing to me. He overestimated his wealth for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Overestimated his wealth by billions of dollars. Billions. I guess I ought to give him credit. He's a hell of a showman. He's a hell of a con man. But the New York system of justice is saying it's over. And of course, without getting into this too deep into the weeds, the feds had a chance to do this a while ago. The Southern District of New York, which is, federal, they had a chance to take Trump out in business terms, to take him right out, to take him down. And they chose not to do that. And some people are asking questions about that.
It goes to, and I take solace in this. What was it? It's been 9 years now that this guy's kind of ran amok. 8 years, 2016. The thieving, the Khashoggi murders, the $2 billion to Jared Kushner. Those are just a few things. I mean, obviously, the turnabout that he got in Turkey. I mean, we don't know half the things. We just know the insurrection stuff. We know the legalities and, pumping up his worth in New York and tax evasion and all those things. But it goes to show, and I say this to my kids all the time, because they're like, how can a guy like that get away with this for so long? How can he be rewarded with the presidency? How can he be? And I look to what's going on in Canada with the same type of politics, the same kind of perception war, same kind of culture war. And I'm like, I want to point to that to everybody to say, hey, listen, It's unsustainable. You know, a life is a lie is unsustainable. Stealing
Yes.
from people is unsustainable. You will get caught. And that's what we're seeing politically too, right? But it gives these guys gas, which is unbelievable to me that they'll turn around and they'll say stuff like, it's political subterfuge. They're trying to take
Yeah.
out the number one candidate. And you're like,
Yeah.
no, dude. They're not preventing you from campaigning. You're preventing the trials with your campaign. Like, that comes first. And it happens. It comes for everybody, right? Like that Schadenfreude that I talk about.
Yeah.
Lies are only lies for a long period of time and they get found out. And this guy's entire life was a lie. Like, life was a lie. And so I look at the lies that we see here that are told in the political atmosphere to gain traction or to convince people that they have to live with fear, which is how Donald Trump won, right? He's like, I'm the only guy that can save America. And I'm hearing the same thing. I'm the only guy that can prevent, inflation. I'm the only guy that can do this. And this guy's, if you keep him in power, he's going to ruin your life. But that's all a lie too. But to me, I look at that and I see hope with the Trump judgment. And I'm like, well, it turns out lies don't have the shelf life of the truth, if you will.
No, I mean, eventually it's over. I mean, he was for many years the only person who could keep himself out of prison, and he was the only person who could keep himself from going out of business. But he is going out of business, and he might end up in prison. What I still can't get my head around is how tens of millions of people want to vote for him, because for tens of millions of people who are Republicans, they still think that he is better for them, better for their country, better for their economy than the alternative. And I'm not asking them to think about a Democrat alternative. I totally get that. But, there are many people in the Republican Party who can get it done. And the idea that millions say, no, none of them, we don't want any of them. We want trade. It's amazing to me. It does feel a little culty.
MAGA?
Yeah, it feels a little culty, where evidence doesn't matter, facts don't matter. You just fall in love with someone, you treat them like some sort of god, and you worship them, even when on a very, very deep level that you're hurting yourself, but somehow you feel this need to sacrifice yourself for them, to burn yourself at their altar.
Or destroy relationships with your neighbor over that.
Yeah, I've never really understood that, but you have to be a cultist, I suppose, to totally get it. It's just incredible to me how many people are willing to keep doing things for him, even though he's clearly doing nothing for them.
Yeah. Charles Adler is our guest. Charles Adler podcast. You can get across all platforms: Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. You can go to crier.co and check it out. 3 Minutes That Matter might be one of my new favorite features. I highly encourage everybody to go and subscribe to Charles's podcast, where you can get 3 Minutes That Matter. He's the only guy I know that can take the most important stories, boil them down into 3 minutes, and give you a valuable lesson at the end of it. And I appreciate you more than you know. I'm so grateful that I got a chance to catch up with you today privately. I'm very grateful I got a chance to pick your brain and just talk about this from a perspective that you have, not just a journalistic or historical perspective, but a personal perspective when it comes to, this whole Nazi SS in the House of Commons story, which is an egregious embarrassment. I hope we can all put this behind us at some point. And I hope we can demand better from all of our politicians. And I hope we can demand, the protection and the provision of the safety of all Canadians, which is, really at the end of the day, I think what anybody wants. When we watch what happens in our political ecosystem, is like, are these people looking out for us anymore? It feels like they're not. But I appreciate you being willing to kind of boil it down for me today, Chuck. Thanks, brother.
Well, thank you for what you're doing for democratic dialogue in this country and for encouraging me to keep on keeping on. Thank you.
Okay, buddy. We'll talk to you soon. Charles Adler, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Adler podcast, one of my favorites. You don't find many people that have, just not the ability to communicate, but the backstory. You don't have many people who have the character that Charles Adler has. And I've been fortunate enough to get to know him over the past few months. And I can tell you the effect that it has on me, the positive effect he's had on me, to be able to have a more educated perspective. And I don't always get it right. Sometimes emotion bleeds into logic, and that's what I do. But everybody needs a Charles Adler in their life. And you can have him in your life by going to Google, Apple, Spotify, etc. Sub to his podcast. It's called the Charles Adler Podcast. 3 Minutes That Matter. One of the greatest, coolest little news features to get you updated on the things that you need to be aware of, in as much as they affect you and your mind. And as you go forward during the day, remember a guy like Charles Adler. You know, he's an elder statesman of journalism. He's a guy that is authentically and unabashedly himself. But he doesn't speak out of turn. You know, and he speaks for humanity, not a culture. He speaks against the things that we all grew up hating. Authoritarianism. He speaks against lying. He speaks for our better angels. So I highly encourage everybody to download his podcast. And if you get a chance to shake his hand, if you see him out and about, do it, because he's protecting not just democracy, but he's helping us understand what really is at stake from a perspective of someone whose family have been through the worst of the worst when it comes to this subject. And that's what we need, right? We need to rely on these people. We need to rely on our better angels, people that have had a wealth of experience, and people that are educated, and people that do care. Like, they do care. They don't just care about a party. They don't just care about politics. They don't just care about having the discussion. They care about learning from the discussion and teaching each other from this discussion. We all have lots to learn from each other. All of us do. I don't know what you have to learn from me, but I'm sure someone will pick something up somewhere. It's like when you follow a guy around, he'll drop a quarter at some point in time. But we need to be able to help each other on a daily basis get a little bit better, right? And so when I talk about what happened in the House of Commons the other day, and I try to offer context, and I say, hey, listen, there is context here people don't understand. What I should do next time is go to guys like Charles and say, help me understand it so I get the best context possible from a human perspective, from a political perspective, because we only are better in as much as we know more, right? Education is all of it. Learning is all of it. You can talk ad nauseum about the things that you think you understand from a limited perspective, but unless you open up your perspective at other people and how that perspective is different to yours, you're never going to get better. You're never going to learn. You're never going to be able to say sorry. We're never going to be able to come together. It's just how life works. So do that. Surround yourself with Charles Adlers. That's what I did. I encourage you to do the same thing, and you can surround him by downloading his podcast today. Charles Adler Podcast, Google, Apple, Spotify, etc. You can go to YouTube as well. Crier Media on YouTube, Dean Blundell Show on YouTube. You can also check everything we do out at Crier Media. Crier.co is the name of the website. We encourage you to keep talking, have these conversations. We encourage you not to shit all over your neighbor just because they have a difference of opinion, unless, of course, they're a Nazi. You can go right ahead. Have a great day, everybody. Appreciate you being part of the program. Don't forget, want to thank our partners at edsfineimports.com. He sells the best underwear on the planet, luxury branded underwear, boxer briefs, Gitch, Gitch. Right now, if you go there, edsfineimports.com, you type in Gitch3, that is your promo code. He'll send you a free pair of underwear. That's the kind of guy he is. Just a great guy. And luxury boxer briefs, pouch in the front, super breathable, made in Canada for Canadians, by Canadians. We have bigger pouches. It's just the way it works. So go to edsfineimports.com, get a free pair of underwear. Gitch3 is your promo code. Hit it on checkout. He'll send you a free pair. And as well, Cantork, our friends at Cantork, they make torque wrenches, beautiful, beautiful torque wrenches, industrial torque wrenches for every application, any bolting solution. They can help you with it. They make it, they design it, they manufacture it, they clean it, all that stuff. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. It's got to be heavy machinery industry, like nuclear, railroad, forestry, the steel industry. It doesn't matter. They'll make it. You just give them the specs and they'll figure it all out. They do it for businesses around the world. It's what Cantork's all about. Go to cantork.com today for more information. Speak to my friend Colin. Have a great day, everybody. Try to be a better person today. I know I will. Yeah, I'll take a swipe. Bye. Oh, bye.